coming to judge the culture. Are you of this culture? Do you live like it? Do you act like it? Do you entertain like it? Jesus is coming. His wrath is coming for you. But grace and mercy is available. Repent, America.
What's going on? Marianne Conde, shout out. Oh.
Judgment is coming.
Tinanuro kami. Masyal kami. We're here at Mount Rushmore National Memorial. And I feel some of them are wearing masks. I'm wearing masks also. Because they said it's required, but I was surprised when I get here, there's nobody. Not very many is wearing masks. By the way, this is Goodson Borgland. He's the one sculpted Mount Rushmore. And everyone in this wall right here is like, this is the name of the persons that participating in that Mount Rushmore sculpture. There's a lot. The sculpture started at 1927. It was done last 1941. Yeah, right, Sue. Heck yeah. It's really nice here. Freedom. Teacher. Who's teacher? Are you talking about yourself, Marianne Conde? Right over here you can see the flag. There is 50 flags in here. Each flag represents for the state. So right over here there's like 3 flags right here. It says the 48th state is Arizona, 25th it's gonna be Arkansas. California is the 31st state. And that's their state flag right there. Every single flag represents to the state. District of Columbia. Florida, 27th state. Georgia is the 4th state. Wow. There's a lot. Shout out. What's your YouTube channel? What's say them subscribe. Missouri, Maryland. There's Maine in there, 23rd state. It's a lot. Let's go over here. There's a U.S. Park Ranger. That's a U.S. Park Ranger right there. He's kind of saying something about what's going on out here.
Why don't we just expand west and eat it all up? Make all the states that have borders out there a whole lot bigger. For some states, that's pretty good, right? If you're in New York, Pennsylvania, just expand to the west. Some of the other places that have claims out there, Connecticut's an interesting one. Connecticut can't really expand west, right? It's got New York on one side of it, Massachusetts above, Rhode Island on the other. But Connecticut insists that it has a colony called the Western Reserve, which is basically modern-day southern Ohio.
It's nice.
Why? Because a bunch of folks from Connecticut were the first white Europeans to settle out there. They're like, hey guys, we own that. That's ours. Now head a little further south, Virginia, right? The very first British colony. Folks probably heard the name Jamestown before, right? Pocahontas, John Smith. That story's fiction mostly, but it goes to a historical place. Jamestown and Virginia, when they're set up and they get their colonial charter, the British aren't thinking about the fact that eventually they might make other colonies in North America.
It's really nice out
Depending
there.
on how you read the British charter for Virginia, it may or may not say that Virginia owns all of North America.
What was that? On top the mountain? On top the mountain. Where are they? Where'd they go?
Huh?
Where's everybody?
I have no idea.
Oh no. That's Washington, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt, the four famous presidents in the United States. They fought for the United States. What was that? Down there is a theater. It's something like a museum down there. And out there is a, you can, there's a walk trail all the way there.
All the way up here?
Yeah, it's in right here. Oh yeah, it's open. Yeah, it's open. I don't know, where's everybody? We should call them, because that one goes all the way that way. The trail all the way around. Yeah, where are they? It's called Michael. It should call Michael. It's Mount Rushmore right there. Mount Rushmore. Oh shit, this my GoPro's on. Oh my goodness. It's hot in here. Let's go over. Let's listen what he say. I don't know where's everybody. Dang, this mask. I don't like wearing this mask.
Somebody else to check for it.
Somebody else.
She is determined for those states.
Congress shall have the power to make new states. There it is. All we do is now make new states. Number two, this will be important against the Civil War. No state can be forced to give up land to make a new state without its consent. Now, that's going to raise some interesting problems. How do we address issues like Vermont and everything I just told you about? Well, this new government, because of the admission clause, can't tell New York you got to give up Vermont. It's a much more powerful government. It's got sway in other places, economic sway. We can put some pressure on New York. New York, why don't you figure out a way to spin off Vermont that's to your best interest? So New York says to Vermont, hey, listen, you give us $30,000, we will give you your independence. So essentially, for a legal bribe, Vermont, 1791, becomes state number 14. It takes about 20 years to pay off the $30,000, but that's a different story. Now, what about all the rest of those claims? We have all those colonies, right? All those places that are claimed between the Appalachians and Mississippi, by states that have a tremendous amount of debt. We can't tell those states that they got to give up that land, but the federal government's more powerful. It's got a bank to take on debt itself. The federal government says to those states, listen, you give us that extra land, we'll take over your debt and you'll be debt free. Who would sign up for that, right? Everyone who goes along with it, all that land falls under federal control. Now, a lot of these areas are already pretty positive. Territories very quickly form, very quickly become states.
Where are they? They went in the store?
They're probably
No way. 1 million people make a shout out.
Alabama, 1819. By 1819, pretty much all the land from the Mississippi River, the Atlantic Ocean, is now made up of states. Now, for a little while that's going on, as territories are being formed, people start to think the game is over, right? The U.S. is filled up with states, it's the end of the story. Except something happens in 1803 that changes everything. Anybody know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. Earlier we used that. Yeah. What's
moving. I was listening.
because every state, he does like every state.
And I want to take a picture of that.
He's doing every state. That's Mount Rushmore right there. South Carolina, there's a lot of helicopter tours. It's a helicopter right about.
1800, the second guy on the mountain, Thomas Jefferson, becomes the third president of the United States. By that point, Mississippi River is becoming more and more violent to the development of our new country. Not only is it one of our borders, but it's a major conduit for commerce, supplies, industrial production, be able to go up and down that river. Problem is, at the time, the U.S. only controls one bank of the Mississippi. Anybody know what country controls the western bank in this period? France. It is the French colony of Louisiana. Now, we're used to thinking of the state of Louisiana as a moderately sized booth-shaped state in the American South. French Louisiana was far larger. Right now, folks, you would be standing in French Louisiana. They expanded all the way up here to the Dakotas, basically over to Yellowstone National Park and back down again. Now, this wasn't really the problem. The problem Jefferson's facing is that the mouth of the Mississippi River is also under French control. Anybody know what that city's called? New Orleans. And that's the issue, right? Because it doesn't matter what goes up and down the river. It matters what can come out of the river at the mouth of it. So 1803, Jefferson sent some delegates to France. Their job, try to buy New Orleans from France. Now, Jefferson's kind of lucky because the guy in charge of France at the time, he's in the midst of trying to conquer all of Europe, and he needs some money. Who are we talking about? Napoleon. Now, Napoleon does not much care about what's going on in North America. Kind of an odd thing when you think about his preoccupation with territory in Europe. So when he hears that the Americans want to buy New Orleans, his response is to tell his people to try to sell them all of French Louisiana. So for the low price of $15 million, which is about 3 cents an acre, I only wish we still had land prices like that, the United States literally doubles in size overnight with the stroke of a pen. And immediately we are game on again for the creation of new states and territories. Now, it doesn't take very long to get one out of Louisiana. The state of Louisiana joined the Union in 1812. It's 9 years after the sale. There was already a substantial population there. But as we're talking about this, let's start to think about some of the bigger picture things, the philosophical things, the cultural movement things that are influencing westward migration and the creation of new states. Now, when I say the word frontier to most Americans today, we think of old John Wayne movies, right? We think of tumbleweeds, cowboys, the old west, or maybe places like this with mining and prospectors. But the reality is, the word frontier, the word west have changed over time. You talk to our early ancestors who were landing on the eastern seaboard, while they're landing in Atlantic City, western New Jersey is the frontier. While they're setting up Manhattan, just a little bit upstate New York is the frontier. That idea has constantly moved with our civilization. Now, there are historians who argue this is what makes us uniquely American. The idea that any time in our history, population really built up in coastal areas. There weren't a lot of jobs, the economy made a downturn, there was a major conflict, or maybe a new religious group looking to get some elbow room. They had the option of traveling west to the frontier. They may get killed along the way, it may not work out, but it is a potential opportunity for opportunity. Now, that's a big thing shaping people moving west. Another big thing shaping them moving west.
Shout out Janet, her
religious belief that some Americans have that the U.S. has a God-given right, a destiny, to expand from one ocean to the other. But the interesting thing about this period, following the purchase of Louisiana, is while those two things drive people to move west, they aren't the major factor in the creation of new states. Instead, the thing that determines the creation of new states in this period is the single greatest political issue of the 19th century. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Slavery. And the very first major national clash over slavery is all Missouri's fault. Let's head over there. Apologies if you're from Missouri, but it's literally true. Folks, with me just coming a little bit tighter so we keep that path open behind us. So 1820, Missouri reaches the magic number for a state to be a territory to become a state, 60,000 people, and it leads to a major political explosion. And to appreciate why, we got to kind of look at the trajectory of slavery in the years prior. You know, there was a time where most northern states had slaves, but by 1804, every state that today we think of as a northern state has a law in the books that says no more slavery. That doesn't necessarily go into effect right away. Some of those states have something called gradual emancipation, where they're going to get rid of their slaves over time, but by 1804, all of them are committed to the idea that eventually no more slaves. For a little while, especially in the late 1700s, a lot of folks thought slavery would die out in the South because it was becoming less and less profitable. But there is a major invention in that period that revolutionizes cotton production in the South. Anybody know what I'm talking about? The cotton gin, right? Eli Whitney's cotton gin. Now, the cotton gin makes the processing of cotton, the removal of its seeds, much faster. But in order to make it profitable, you still need a huge labor force to go out and pick that cotton. What that means for slavery is suddenly slavery is more profitable than ever. And this sets the North and South up on a collision course. Now, if we look at the slave states that joined the Union in this period, right, all the ones I've named already, early on, unintentionally, over time, intentionally, a pattern emerges. Every time a new slave state joins, a new free state tends to join right before or right after. And that maintains a balance. The most important place for that balance, of course, is the Senate, right? Where every state gets 2 people, 2 senators. When we get to Missouri, we have an equal balance between slave and free states. But Missouri says, hey, we want to join the Union as a slave state. What to do? Things deadlock for a while. Finally, something comes into effect called the Missouri Compromise. This is really going to dictate American politics until just before the Civil War. The Missouri Compromise basically says Missouri can join the Union as a slave state if and only if the state of Maine joins the Union that same year as a free state. Now, Maine's another one of those places a lot of folks are surprised to find out wasn't one of the 13 colonies, right? It's up there in New England. Seems odd. Well, it was there, but it wasn't much like Vermont. Does anybody know what state Maine used to be part of? Massachusetts, very good. Northern province of Massachusetts. A little odd when you think about the fact that they don't touch, but hey, who are we to judge? In any case, Maine up there, as a part of Massachusetts, had representatives, right? There were congressmen from the Massachusetts delegation that represented Maine. 5 of them, in fact. Now, all these men have spent their lives politically committed to independence for Maine. Something Maine had advocated for many years. They finally have it as part of this agreement. Every one of those men votes against the Missouri Compromise. And the reason they do is they're also committed abolitionists. They do not want the independence of their state to be tied to slavery. In any case, the agreement goes through. Maine joins, Missouri joins, maintaining the balance. Missouri Compromise says something else really important too. They know this problem will emerge again, so they set up a line, right? Missouri Compromise basically says, take the southern border of Missouri, run out to the Pacific Ocean. Moving forward, any land under that line that wants to become a state becomes a slave state. Any land above that line wants to become a state becomes a free state, period. And in theory, that's supposed to hold things together. In practice, there's a lot of animosity over this. They wait 15 years till another state joins the Union. I know that doesn't sound like a lot of time, but here's the thing. There is not a gap of that length until the 20th century between statehoods, apart from this one period. When states start to rejoin the Union, the same old pattern emerges. 1836 and 37, Arkansas joins as a slave state, Michigan joins as a free state. In the years that follow, Florida and Texas join as slave states, Iowa, Wisconsin join as free states. Now, of all those states in that period, the one that is the most important to our continuing story because of how it joins the Union is the state of Texas. Let's head on over there and find out why.
Let's go to Texas.
Get our exercise in to walk is hard.
And folks, again, if you're with me, just kind of come a little further over this way so we can keep the path open behind us for folks who are trying to get back and forth. For many years, Texas's tourism slogan was that it's like a whole other country, right? And it's one of the few places in this country where that is quite literally true. For about 9 years, Texas was an independent nation. Now, the reason goes back to something we spoke about earlier, westward migration, right? As Americans were leaving the East Coast and heading further and further inland, a lot of them weren't paying attention to national borders, and a sizable chunk of them end up settling in what is today Texas, but at the time was the Empire of Mexico. Now, by the mid-1830s, there's quite a few of them there, and they decide to launch a revolution and declare independence from Mexico. I'm hoping you folks remember the Alamo, pun intended. That is part of that conflict. Ultimately, they win. They gain their independence from Mexico, and almost immediately they're like, hey, America, we want to join. What do you think? The United States says, no thank you, for 9 full years. Now, the reason gets back to the slavery issue, right? Texas, as an independent nation, is much larger than Texas as a state today. And the fear is if they join the Union, they might be carved up into 3 or 4 separate states. Again, think Missouri Compromise line, who will all join the Union as slave states. That might mean 6 to 8 more senators who are pro-slavery. So we hold off, we hold off, we hold off. Finally, they take a page from Vermont. By the 1840s, they start courting Great Britain, not to join them, but for an intentional alliance, right? They're looking for friends. We already got Great Britain, our mortal enemy, on our northern border. We don't want them on our southern border, too. The U.S. relents. Texas joins the Union. Now, almost immediately, that leads to the Mexican-American War. A short, brutal conflict I'm not going to get into too many details about, but suffice to say the U.S. wins. Treaty that ends it. Another really important treaty, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. It says that as part of the end of the war, Mexico will have to surrender a huge chunk of territory. So not only is Texas now part of the United States, but basically the whole modern Southwest, up through Colorado, over to California, all joins the Union. This is a bigger chunk of territory than the Louisiana Purchase was in 1803. Now this is going to lead to some problems because a lot of folks start to say, well, most of that new land is actually above the Missouri Compromise line. Doesn't that mean there's going to be a lot more free states in the future than slave states? Leads to another big crisis. The solution to this one is called the Kansas Nebraska Act. Now the reason we're focusing on Kansas is this is the part of the country that's getting close to 60,000. From what I told you about 60,000, that's the magic number to become a state. So over in Kansas, they're arguing about whether they should be a free state or a slave state. The new compromise says no more Missouri line. From now on, popular sovereignty. What that means is whenever a territory gets ready to become a state, they're going to have a vote, and the people of the territory will vote whether they'll be a slave state or a free state. Doesn't work out very well. Kansas gets ready to hold its vote. Everybody's worried about the issue. Tens of thousands of people flood into Kansas. Not only they try to vote illegally, they start shooting at each other. Very quickly, Kansas enters a period called Bleeding Kansas. Historians study it as basically the pregame show to the American Civil War. That's very brutal. Lots of people are killed. What comes out of that, though, is three conclusions. Conclusion number one, most Americans accept, you know what, this is probably we're at a point where people are willing to shoot at each other over this issue. Two, that probably means the slavery issue is going to have to be settled by violence. When people start to accept that reality. Number three, it leads to the creation of the first national political party on a large scale that is committed to the absolute halt of the spread of slavery, the Republican Party. They're not yet saying we want to get rid of slavery, but they're saying that they're going to stake their political futures on not letting slavery expand to any new territories. Now, eventually, in the years that follow, more states start to join the Union. But notice how the pattern here has changed. 1850, so just 2 years after the end of the Mexican-American War, California joins as a free state. 1858, Minnesota, free state. 1859, Oregon, free state. 1861, Kansas, free state. Now, Kansas joins the Union on January 29, 1861. As of that date, 6 southern states have already left the Union, with 5 more to follow, and the U.S. is now in the middle of the Civil War. Now, no question about it, slavery at the heart of the Civil War. But if we look at the Civil War as a legal question, the single biggest legal question in the Civil War, does a state have a legal right to leave the Union? To answer that question, let's head on over to Virginia. So the ultimate answer to my question is no, a state does not have a legal right to leave the Union. That is proved in blood by Union soldiers in the American Civil War. It is affirmed by the Supreme Court in several different decisions both during and after the war. But it's important for us to understand the legal position of both sides. As far as the South is concerned, because the individual states joined the Union of their own free will, they never surrendered their sovereignty. And therefore, if they want, like an independent country as part of the UN, that's another good example here, they can turn around and skedaddle if they so choose. That is not how the North sees it. As far as the North is concerned, when you join the Union, you surrendered your sovereignty. You cease to be an independent nation. Therefore, you can't turn around and leave. And when the South does that, when those different conventions in the South declare themselves independent, even if that was the legal state government that did it, they stopped being legal state officials the moment they declared independence. It's an act of treason. They become traitors, illegally occupying U.S. territory. Thus, Lincoln's legal pretext to send troops to stop them. The reason this matters for us is every one of those southern states, there were folks who said, we are not seceding. We want to stay loyal to the Union. Some of them fought very loyally for the Union, but nowhere were they more successful than Virginia. Virginia at the time was a lot bigger than it is today because West Virginia used to be part of the state of Virginia to this point. Now, West Virginia had a very different culture than the rest of Virginia, right? We think about Virginia of the period, we think of plantations, landed aristocracy, right? 2 out of the 4 guys up on the mountain there. West Virginia is filled with mining and early industry, a lot of rivers. Folks there are not dependent on slavery for their economy, and they resent the control the wealthier half of the states of the South has on state politics. So when Virginia secedes from the Union, those folks in the 27 northwestern counties walk out of the secession convention. They rally in Wheeling, the capital of West Virginia, and declare themselves the restored government of the state of Virginia and pledge loyalty and fight for the Union. Now, this is a pretty big deal for a couple reasons. Number one, it's important to the war effort, right? This is an area filled with industry, mining, natural resources. It stays as part of the Union. Early war, Union doesn't do so good. Some of our very few early victories are in what becomes West Virginia. Additionally, late in the war, it becomes an important route for our troops to get into the South to attack the rest of Virginia. But by 1863, the West Virginians get a little worried. Remember, they're still technically part of the state of Virginia. But what happens when the war ends and now those folks from Southern Virginia can vote as part of Virginia again, too? They're going to get overwhelmed. They're going to lose their political clout. They decide to start making moves toward independence. problem is, what did I tell you the admission clause in the Constitution says about creating a new state from an old state? Old state's got to sign off, right? Do we think the folks in Southern Virginia are going to say okay to West Virginia leaving? No, but remember, those folks are traitors, right? They've left the United States. They don't have a seat at the table, exactly. Who's the legal government of the entirety of Virginia right now? Just the folks from West Virginia. So they're the only people in our history to, as part of one state, vote themselves independent only to become that new state. And they joined the Union in 1863, something they are very, very proud of. Now, they are not the only state to join the Union because of the Civil War. The other one is Nevada. Nevada's history is kind of interesting. By 1864, things are not looking so good for Abraham Lincoln. Quite a few losses in that period. Civil Wars dragged on and on. Looks like he may lose the election that November. The Democrat platform for that election says that if they win, they're going to ask for peace with the South, let the South go. Now, there are a lot of people really worried about that. A lot of those folks realize that Nevada, way out there in the West, there's not 60,000 people yet. It's close enough that if it becomes a state, it probably will cast its votes for Abraham Lincoln, which would be pretty important to his re-election. The problem is getting into like October 1864, not a lot of time to make a new state. They don't have 60,000 people. But way back when, somebody put a clause in one of those many laws we talked about that says, if it's in the national interest, we can waive the 60,000 people requirement for a territory to become a state. Well, the Republicans in Congress feel like re-electing Abraham Lincoln is in the national interest, and they do exactly that. The problem is, to have a new state, you need to have the state write a constitution. Got a couple of weeks here. It's October 1864. Long ride from Nevada to Washington. So Nevada gets its constitution written. What are they going to do? Well, they realize they can't send a rider, so they decide to telegraph their constitution. Folks know what a telegraph is? ... dash. Think about how long that takes for each letter. They telegraph the entire Constitution across the country to Washington. It takes 13 hours. It costs $5,000, but it works. They joined the Union in time to support Abraham Lincoln that November, and in time to cast votes in favor of the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery the following January. Now Nevada is very, very proud of that history. Does anybody know what they call themselves, what their state motto is, Nevada?
Battle-born.
Yeah, I heard it back there. The Battle-born state, in honor of their role in the Civil War. Silver State's one of them too, but Battle-born is the one that's important for us. Now, Nevada's not the only, so Nevada's the last state to come out of the Civil War during the Civil War. The one more that's radically shaped by the Civil War is Nebraska. They reached their magic number, 60,000, in 1867. And during the war, they've been settled by a lot of abolitionists. They were very, very in support of the Union cause. So when they sit down and they write their state constitution, they put in it from the very beginning. First state to do this successfully, African Americans shall have the right to vote in Nebraska. The problem is, who's the president in 1867? Is it Abe Lincoln? No, he got killed 2 years early. Who takes over after him? Andrew Johnson, kind of a squirrely character. Johnson is, he's loyal to the Union, though he's from Tennessee, he's vice president under Lincoln, but he's definitely a white supremacist. Does not support African-American suffrage, the right to vote. He vetoes the state bill for Nebraska because of that inclusion, but there's enough folks in Congress supporting it, that they're able to override the veto, and Nebraska becomes the first state with African-American voting rights from the very beginning to join the Union that year. Now, all this has been happening. Westward migration slowed a little bit because of the Civil War, but it's going to explode again in 1869 thanks to a major industrial achievement, the Continental Railroad. And to talk about that, we're going to go over to our final stop in South Dakota. I know we're already there, but we're going to the platform. No, I'm sorry. It's my New York accent has been on.
It's okay.
I get excited, I will. I don't feel as bad then. So it's in this post-Civil War period, thanks to the railroad, thanks to developments in irrigation, thanks to the fact that a lot of other land is already taken up, that the places today we think of as the frontier of the West because of those John Wayne movies start to actually become populated and join the Union. So post-Civil War, we wait a little while. 1876, Colorado joins the Union. A little over 10 years later, in the space of just 2 years, 1889 to 1890, 6 states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Washington, Idaho, and Wyoming all joined the Union. Now, 1890 is a big year for American history. Just like they do now, every 10 years back then, the Census Bureau will go out all over the country and count up how many people are out there, right? 1890, they reach a startling conclusion. They conclude that every single census tract of the country has some form of settlement in it. Therefore, there is no longer a frontier. and they declare the frontier no longer exists as of 1890. Now, by this point, territories are occupying territory that isn't made up of states. Some of those states take a little longer to join the Union, but the years that follow, we get Utah 1896, Oklahoma 1907, New Mexico 1912, Arizona 1912. And by 1912, pretty much all the land from the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean is made up of U.S. states. Now, this is where things really slow down. Following 1912, we fight a world war, then we have a Great Depression, then we fight another major world war, right? That Second World War, our empire around the world, we start to gain all those colonies throughout the 50 years prior, becomes real important, particularly to defeating the Japanese. Military need and then eventually tourism, natural resources, drive the buildup of populations in two of those territories. Where am I talking about? Alaska and Hawaii. And finally, by 1959, a little bit after the war ends, they reach the requisite population, 60,000 people, to join the United States of America. 60,000 people for a territory to become a state. That's the magic number. So they reach the magic number, they ask to join the Union. I think a lot of people think they both joined in 1959 for convenience, right? Why have a 49-star flag when we go from 48 to 50, right? Or maybe just coincidence. It is a carefully calculated political decision. At the time, it's flipped today. At the time, everybody knows if Alaska joins the Union, we will reliably vote Democrat. Everybody also knows if Hawaii joins the Union, at the time, it will reliably vote Republican. The two political parties make a deal, Senate affirms it, they both join within a year of each other to ensure the same old balance we've spoken about from the very beginning is maintained. Now, folks, it's been 62 years since the state joined the Union, longest gap in our history. We hear talk about it, right? They talk about Puerto Rico, they talk about Washington, D.C. For those of you who weren't here from the beginning, I'm from Long Island, New York. Long Island's been trying to leave New York for my entire life. I certainly hope we succeed. I don't think it's going to happen. Vermont brought off their independence from New York with $30,000. It's going to cost us a bit more, I think. However, if you look way over there, between Wyoming and Wisconsin, there is a blank tablet. Now, I'd like to tell you that that's there because of the need for potential new states. The reality is we need the number divisible by 3 to not make the avenue of flags look ridiculous. But I do like to say that that does reflect the idea that we never know what the future may hold. Thank you very much, folks. Well, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, enjoy your day here and that beautiful breeze we've got right now. Very good. My pleasure.
Let's go. Where's everybody? What's that? Shout out to a million people. Oh, mega shout out for Keep Safe and God bless from Guadalupe Black. Shout out to you. Darwin Pacheco. Thank you, Darwin.
Hey Dean,
Yes.
what's the use of this car?
We can use that in the tramway.
Yeah?
Tramway. It's kind of like a zip line or something like that, but I don't know if it's still open because it's 4 o'clock already.
Oh, okay, really?
Yeah.
There's a plan zip line and this we do something here, you know.
Ready?
What you can see? Nothing.
This nice.
It's
Yeah,
the,
close up to East today.
what I'm gonna say is I'm so hungry.
Yeah, that video.
I wanna go find something to eat. Where are you? Why did you disappear?
Huh?
Where did you go?
I was with everybody.
Where?
We go and eat.
Oh my goodness.
Jody.
One more? She's on her own. We forgot something.
Why you don't go with them? Should take my mask off. Everybody's not wearing. Let's go. Should get something to eat. That's why they disappeared, because they went to get something to eat. I was thinking like they are already in the trail somewhere, but they are not. Oh my goodness.
They sit down to write the Constitution. All the state's numbers and years are traced to when they ratify the Constitution. So even though those 13 all joined the same day, basically, they are on the plaques reflecting when they got.
Sana all my forever.
Delaware doesn't really deserve credit for it. They get it.
Sada na pa ako, antok pa ako.
Delaware was literally today's line.
Pam param pam 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 param param pam. So, may kainan dito. What's going on here? Ice cream.
That kind of goes across.
It's like something's different. Gift shop is right over there. I don't know what's going on there. I think right there, they just bought right there. Yeah, or inside, I don't know. Maybe inside. Either way. That one is like lemonade only. Two million people, make a shout out. Oh my god, there's a lot of people here. I don't know, we're gonna get something. Oh, that's ice cream. That's a long. Ooh. Is it close? Is it close in here? It's open. Whew, it's so hot, my goodness. Raincoat, itty shower out. I don't know what we're gonna get in here. Oh, this is exit only. Exit, exit. I don't know what's in here. Jesus, hot sandwich. One million people, who are you? Dakota Kitchen. I don't know. Well, may alak pala dito. Where's the soda? What is this? Oh shit, it's a fudge. Buy two, get one free. Line up, line up, line up, line up, line up. All on drinks. I'm gonna end my life because I want to eat something. Thank you for staying.